It was my son who finally said it out loud. Not me. I'd known something was wrong for months, the way you know a storm is coming before the clouds actually turn. Something in the pressure, something in the air. But I kept telling myself I was being an old fool. 63 years old, retired from 31 years with Canada Post, and still too proud to trust my own gut. My name is Walter, and this is the hardest thing I've ever had to sit down and tell. My wife's name is Renee. We met in Thunder Bay in 1987 at a New Year's party that neither of us had actually wanted to go to. She was 24. I was 26. She had this way of standing in a room like she was already deciding whether it was worth her time. I found it fascinating then. I understand it differently now. We built something real, or I thought we did. A house in Sudbury, 2 kids, a son, then 3 years later, a daughter. I drove a mail route for 3 decades. Renee worked part-time at a dental clinic for years, then stopped when her mother got sick, and somehow just never went back. That was fine. I never minded. We were comfortable. Not rich. Canada Post doesn't make you rich, but we owned our home outright by the time I was 58, which in this market, in this country, felt like winning something. Our daughter is 29. She works in healthcare administration in Ottawa. She's methodical and careful, and she laughs exactly the way I do, which her brother always teased her about growing up. She'd been with her boyfriend for 4 years. His name is, and I'll use his name here because he's earned it. His name is Mitchell. 32, from Barrie originally, worked in commercial real estate. He had one of those firm handshakes that men practice in front of mirrors. He called me sir the first time we met, and only the first time. After that, it was Walter, which I didn't love, but I told myself I was being old-fashioned. He proposed to my daughter on a hiking trail outside of Gatineau Park last September. She called me from the trail, still out of breath, and I could hear that she was crying happy. I sat in my kitchen in Sudbury and listened and thought, good, this is good. Whatever else is complicated in life, this is good. They set the date for the following June. A small ceremony, maybe 60 people, at a vineyard near Niagara-on-the-Lake. Renee threw herself into the planning. That was the first thing I should have read differently. She suddenly had opinions about everything. The table arrangements, the florist, which block of rooms to book at the inn. She was on the phone constantly. I assumed she was talking to my daughter. I assumed a lot of things. Mitchell started coming up to Sudbury more often in the months after the engagement. I thought it was because he was trying, the way you try when you want someone's father to actually like you. He'd come for long weekends, stay in the guest room, help me with small things around the yard. One Saturday in November, he helped me re-insulate the crawl space under the back porch. I remember thinking he wasn't as useless as I'd first figured. I also remember that Renee, that same weekend, was unusually cheerful, bright in a way that read strange, like someone performing a mood rather than having one. But I said nothing. I scraped the old caulking off the porch window and said nothing. The first concrete thing happened in January. I was looking for a form, my T4 from the pension, and I went into the filing cabinet in the study, the one Renee and I shared. She handled most of the financial paperwork. I didn't mind. She was organized, always had been. But that day I pulled out the wrong folder by accident and found something I wasn't looking for. It was a printed email, the kind of thing you print because you want to keep a physical copy, the kind of thing you print because you're not sure you trust your own memory of reading it. The email was from a real estate agent, not in Sudbury, in Kelowna, British Columbia. It was addressed to Renee, and it was a follow-up on a showing, a property showing, for a 2-bedroom condo. My wife had gone to look at a condo in Kelowna in October. She had told me she was visiting her friend from the dental clinic, a woman I'd met twice, who'd moved out west. I stood in the study with that printed email in my hand for a long time. I put it back exactly where I found it. I went and made myself a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table and looked out the window at the snow on the backyard. She was planning to leave. That was my first thought. She was planning to leave and she wanted to have somewhere to go. That was it. That was what I told myself. A marriage ending. Painful, but survivable. I did not yet understand the full shape of what was happening. I didn't tell my son, I didn't tell my daughter, I didn't tell anyone. I just started paying attention in a way I hadn't let myself before. I started noticing whose name came up, how often, in what tone. I started noticing when Renee's phone screen went dark a half-second too quickly when I walked into her room. It was my son who broke it open. He's 32, my son. He lives in Hamilton, works in IT infrastructure, the kind of job I couldn't explain even if I had to. He came up to Sudbury in February for a long weekend, and on the Saturday night after Renee had gone to bed early with what she said was a headache, he sat across from me at the kitchen table, and he looked at me for a moment with an expression I hadn't seen on his face since he was a teenager and had broken something he wasn't sure how to tell me about. He said, "Dad, I need to show you something, and I need you to not react until I've explained the whole thing." I said, "All right." He put his phone on the table between us. It was a text exchange, his sister's account, because she'd given him access to it deliberately, on purpose, because she'd been trying to figure out how to tell me herself and couldn't get the words right and had finally asked her brother to do it. The texts were between my daughter and Mitchell. From 3 weeks earlier, my daughter had found a message on Mitchell's laptop. She'd been borrowing it to print something, the printer cable, some small domestic ordinary thing, and she had seen a message she wasn't supposed to see. Mitchell and Renee had been communicating privately since August. Not as future mother-in-law and future son-in-law. I sat at my kitchen table in Sudbury, Ontario in February, and I read the text exchange between my children, and the room went very quiet around me. My son kept his eyes on me the whole time. He didn't say anything. He just let me read. My daughter had not confronted either of them, not yet. She had told her brother, and together they had spent 3 weeks quietly gathering. Phone records she'd found backed up on a shared family plan, a credit card statement that Mitchell had left on the counter that my daughter had photographed before he could take it back. A message thread Mitchell had screenshotted himself and then apparently forgotten he'd airdropped to the family iPad that my daughter sometimes used. 3 weeks. My 29-year-old daughter had held this for 3 weeks without calling me because she was trying to protect me. She was trying to have the whole thing ready before she brought it to me. She didn't want to hand me a grenade. She wanted to hand me a grenade with a plan. I excused myself from the kitchen for a few minutes. I went to the bathroom and ran the cold tap and looked at my face in the mirror. 63 years old, retired. I'd driven the same postal route for a long time. I knew every front door on it. I went back to the kitchen and sat down. "Tell me what we're doing," I said. My son closed his phone. "That's up to you, Dad, but we have a few ideas." They had 3 weeks of ideas. The first thing I did, the very first thing the next morning, was call a lawyer. Not a family friend, not someone Renee and I both knew. A lawyer in Barrie who had been recommended to me by a colleague from Canada Post who'd been through a divorce 8 years earlier. I drove down on a Tuesday, told Renee I had a medical follow-up, and sat in a quiet office and explained the situation. The lawyer's name was Phyllis. She was in her mid-50s, practical, with reading glasses she kept on a chain around her neck. She listened to the whole thing without interrupting, then asked me 3 questions. Did my wife have access to joint accounts? Did she know the location of our investment documents? Was my name the sole name on the mortgage? The answers were yes, yes, and yes. She told me we needed to move carefully and quickly. Within the week, I had separated my direct pension deposit into a new individual account at a different branch than the one Renee and I shared. I did not close the joint account. Phyllis said not to. It would alert Renee before we were ready. I simply stopped feeding it. The RRSP I'd been contributing to for 20 years had my daughter listed as sole beneficiary since our wills were last updated in 2018. That was fine. I left it. What Renee did not know was that the house, our house, the one I'd driven snow routes through February storms to pay for, had been originally purchased in my name alone. When we'd refinanced in 2009, Renee had been added, but the original title, history, and my pension documents told a clear story that Phyllis said would be relevant. I am not a complicated man. I drove mail. I watched hockey. I grew tomatoes in the summer in a small raised bed by the back fence. I did not think of myself as someone who made plans. But it turns out that when the thing you've built for 30 years is being quietly taken apart around you, you find a patience in yourself you didn't know was there. Mitchell came up for a weekend in March. He had no idea my son had been there in February. He had no idea that my daughter had given her brother the key. He came in on Friday evening, stomped the snow off his boots in the front hall the way he always did, the way I'd always thought was considerate. He brought a bottle of Ontario Red from a winery in the county, a nice one, nicer than he usually brought. I remember thinking he'd been coached. Renee made dinner. I sat at the table and ate and answered questions about my health, my retirement, whether I was keeping busy. I mentioned I'd been going through the filing cabinet, organizing some paperwork. I watched Renee's face as I said it. Nothing. Not a flicker. She was better at this than I'd given her credit for. After dinner, Mitchell asked if he could look at the basement. He said my daughter had mentioned the storage shelving, and he thought he might know a better configuration. I said, sure, go ahead. I'll come down with you. We stood in the basement in the low light among the shelves where I'd kept 30 years of accumulated life, Christmas boxes, old hockey equipment, the girls' books I hadn't had the heart to throw out, my son's things in tubs labeled in my daughter's handwriting from when she was 12. Mitchell looked around the space with a particular kind of attention, not the attention of someone trying to help with shelving. Nice square footage, he said. You ever think about finishing it? I said I hadn't. Could add real value, he said, especially with the market the way it is. I looked at him for a moment. He was 32, in a good coat, and he was standing in my basement telling me about the market value of my house. I'm not planning to sell, I said. Sure, he said, just thinking out loud. He wasn't thinking out loud. He was measuring. The wedding date, June, was now 10 weeks away. Renee had been managing most of the payments through a joint credit card that I had not yet addressed on Phyllis's advice. Let the paper trail build, Phyllis had said. Let them keep making choices that are documented. My daughter and I had started speaking in a new way. Brief calls, careful language, nothing that would look strange if reviewed. She never broke in front of me. Not once. She was going through something that I couldn't fully fathom. The man she planned to marry, the mother she'd grown up with, and she held it with a stillness that made me ache with pride and grief simultaneously. She had a plan for the wedding. This is the part I want to be clear about. Neither of us wanted a scene. We did not want the movie version of this. No standing up at the ceremony, no confronting them in a restaurant, no dramatic moment for its own sake. What we wanted was control. What we wanted was to be the ones who decided how this ended. 3 weeks before the June date, my daughter called the vineyard directly and canceled the reservation. She'd been the one to book it originally under her name. The cancellation came with a partial penalty, which was absorbed by the deposit, a deposit Mitchell had contributed to. That deposit was now gone. At the same time, my son helped me remove Renee from the secondary authorization on my pension account. This was entirely within my rights. It was a beneficiary notation she'd been added to informally, not legally binding. My daughter was already the named beneficiary on the RRSP. Everything was simply being returned to the shape it had always had on paper. On a Thursday evening in May, I sat at the kitchen table after dinner, and I told Renee I needed to speak with her. I had a folder in front of me. Not a thick folder, not dramatic, just a few documents. I told her I knew about Kelowna. I told her I knew about the private messages. I told her I knew Mitchell had come to Sudbury in March to look at the square footage of my basement. She went very still. She had the look of someone who has been running and has just realized the road ends. She started to speak. I let her. She said things about unhappiness, about years of quiet loneliness, about feeling unseen. Some of it was probably even true. I don't say that without meaning it. 36 years is a long time, and I don't believe I was a perfect husband. I know I was absorbed. I know I sometimes treated the house like a place to recover from work rather than a place where a full life was happening around me. But there's unhappy, and there's a 2-bedroom condo in Kelowna you've already viewed. I told her that the wedding venue had been canceled. I told her that my lawyer had been retained. I told her that my son and my daughter both knew everything. I told her she had 30 days to make arrangements. She did not scream. She did not cry. She looked at me for a long moment, and then she said, "You planned this." "I did," I said. There was a silence. She picked up her phone from the table and went upstairs. I don't know what she said to Mitchell that night. I didn't ask, and my daughter didn't tell me, and my daughter, to her tremendous credit, had already begun the quiet process of extracting herself from that relationship in the weeks prior, so that by the time the venue was canceled, she had documentation ready and her own legal consultation completed. She had found this lawyer herself. She had found it, scheduled it, paid for it from her own account, and not mentioned it to me until it was done, because she didn't want me to worry. She is 30 years old now, as of this April. We went for dinner in Ottawa, just the two of us, at a restaurant near the canal. She ordered the salmon. She had 1 glass of wine. She talked about work, about a new project she was managing, about a colleague she'd become friends with. At the end of the meal, she looked at me and said, "Are you okay, Dad?" I thought about the question. 63 years old, retired postal worker, small raised bed of tomatoes. I'd have to plan alone this year. "I'm going to be," I said. She nodded. She believed me, which helped. My son drove up to Sudbury 2 weekends ago, and we finished re-insulating the back porch properly, the job Mitchell had been helping with in November when I still thought I understood my life. It took us most of Saturday. We ordered pizza. We watched the Leafs lose, which felt appropriate. He didn't make it sentimental, and neither did I, because that's not how we are. But when he left Sunday morning, he hugged me in the driveway for a moment longer than usual, and I let him. Renee is in Kelowna now. I don't know if Mitchell is with her. I don't think it matters anymore. I'm still in the house. My name is still on the mortgage. The tomatoes are in the ground, and the porch doesn't let in any cold air. And every morning I make my coffee and sit at the kitchen table and look out at the backyard, and it is quiet in a way that is slowly beginning to feel like mine. I wasn't the victim in this story. I was just the last one to know what kind of story it was. And once I knew, once my children trusted me enough to show me, I made sure I was the one who wrote the ending. The tomatoes are in the ground now. I planted them alone this year, which I thought would feel like a loss, and instead just felt like a Saturday. I've had a lot of time to sit with what happened, not to untangle it exactly, because some things don't untangle so much as they just settle, like sediment after the water finally goes still. What I keep coming back to isn't the betrayal itself. It isn't Renee or Mitchell or the Kelowna condo I never saw. What I keep coming back to is my daughter sitting across from me at a restaurant by the canal in Ottawa, asking if I was okay. The way she asked it. Quiet, direct, not performing concern, just actually wanting to know. She held something unbearable for 3 weeks to protect me. Then she handed it to me with a plan already attached. That's not something you can teach a person in a single conversation. That kind of steadiness comes from somewhere deeper, from choices made over years about who you want to be when things go wrong. I think about cause and effect a lot now. Not in a mystical way. I'm a retired postal worker from Sudbury. I'm not built for mysticism, but in a plain, practical way. Mitchell walked into my home in November and helped me insulate a porch, and in March he stood in my basement and measured my square footage with his eyes. Those two actions came from the same person making the same kind of choice, just at different stages of revealing himself. And eventually that kind of character finds its own consequences, not because the universe arranges it, but because people who act without integrity eventually make enough choices that the shape of who they are becomes undeniable, even to themselves. My son drove 4 hours to sit across from me at a kitchen table on a February night and show me something he knew would hurt me because he believed I deserved to know the truth and to have time to respond to it properly. That took something. A certain kind of moral seriousness that I honestly don't think I ever talked to him about directly. I just tried to live it, show up, tell the truth, don't take what isn't yours, and apparently some of it stuck. What got us through wasn't luck. It was that my children thought clearly when I couldn't. They gathered information when they wanted to scream. They consulted a lawyer when they wanted to confront. They held the longer view when the short view would have felt so much more satisfying. That kind of thinking, patient, precise, focused on outcome rather than feeling, is something I'll be grateful for the rest of my life. It saved me from making a version of this story that ended badly for everyone, including me. And then there's the matter of simply not quitting. I won't pretend the weeks between February and May were easy. There were mornings I sat at that kitchen table and the coffee went cold because I forgot to drink it. There were evenings I went to bed early, not because I was tired, but because I didn't know what else to do with myself. But I kept calling Phyllis. I kept making the small, correct decisions. I kept showing up to my own life, even when I didn't particularly want to. That's the only thing I know how to tell someone who might be sitting where I was sitting last winter. Not that it stops hurting, not that the answers are simple, just that the next right thing is usually smaller than it looks. And that your children, if you raise them with any honesty at all, may understand you better than you think. The porch is tight now. No cold air coming in. I'm going to have a good summer.